The sun was setting over a small village, casting a warm orange glow over the thatched roofs of the houses. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming cherry blossoms, and the sound of children's laughter carried on the gentle breeze. In a small cottage on the edge of the village, an old man named Hanasaka Jiisan was sitting on his porch, watching the world slow down as the day came to a close. Hanasaka Jiisan was a kind and gentle soul, with a heart full of love for nature and all its creatures. He spent his days tending to his garden, where he grew the most beautiful and vibrant flowers anyone had ever seen. His garden was a haven for bees and butterflies, and the old man took great joy in watching them flit from flower to flower, collecting nectar and spreading pollen. As the old man sat on his porch, he was joined by his wife, Hannah. She was a kind and gentle woman, with a warm smile and a quick laugh. She brought out a tray of steaming hot tea, and the two of them sat together, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky. "It's going to be a beautiful night," Hannah said, snuggling up close to her husband. "The moon is full, and the air is filled with the scent of blooming flowers." Hanasaka Jiisan smiled, taking a sip of his tea. "Yes, my dear," he said. "It's a night to be cherished. The world is at peace, and all is right with the world." As they sat together, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching. It was their granddaughter, Emiko, who had come to visit her grandparents for the evening. She was a curious and lively child, with a mop of curly black hair and a smile that could light up the darkest of rooms. "Obaken, Ojiken," Emiko said, using the Japanese terms of respect for her grandparents. "I'm so happy to be here with you tonight. I love watching the stars with you." Hanasaka Jiisan and Hannah smiled at each other, happy to have their granddaughter with them. They invited her to sit down, and the three of them sat together, watching the night sky and drinking their tea. As they sat there, Hanasaka Jiisan began to tell a story. "You know, Emiko," he said, "I have a special gift. I can make flowers bloom with just a touch of my hand." Emiko's eyes widened with wonder, and she looked at her grandfather with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. "Really, Ojiken?" she asked. "How do you do it?" Hanasaka Jiisan smiled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "It's a secret," he said. "But I'll show you tomorrow. For now, let's just enjoy the peace and quiet of the night." As they sat there, the night air grew quieter, and the stars shone brighter. The sound of crickets and the rustling of leaves filled the air, and the old man, his wife, and their granddaughter felt their hearts fill with peace and contentment. It was a moment to be cherished, a moment of perfect happiness and tranquility. And as they sat there, they knew that tomorrow would bring its own joys and wonders, and that the old man's gift would bring beauty and magic to their lives. The night was still young, and the moon was high in the sky. Hanasaka Jiisan, Hannah, and Emiko sat together, enjoying each other's company and the beauty of the night. The old man's garden, full of blooming flowers, was a testament to his love and care for nature. And as they sat there, they felt grateful for this moment, and for the love that they shared. As the night wore on, the old man's stories became more gentle, and his voice grew softer. Emiko's eyes began to droop, and she snuggled up close to her grandparents. The world outside was quiet, and the only sound was the old man's voice, weaving a spell of peace and tranquility. And as they sat there, they knew that it was time for sleep, and that the old man's gift would bring beauty and wonder to their dreams. The old man's voice grew softer, and his words became a gentle lullaby. Emiko's eyes closed, and she felt her grandparents' warmth around her. Hana gently stroked her hair, and Hanasaka Jiisan wrapped his arm around them, holding them close. The night air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and the sound of crickets provided a soothing background melody. As they sat there, the world seemed to slow down, and the only thing that mattered was the love they shared. As Emiko drifted off to sleep, Hanasaka Jiisan and Hana sat quietly, watching the stars twinkling above. They felt grateful for this moment, and for the love that filled their hearts. The old man's garden, full of life and beauty, was a testament to the power of love and care. Hanasaka Jiisan looked at his wife, and smiled, his eyes shining with happiness. "My dear," he said, "I'm so grateful for this life we've built together." Hana smiled back, her eyes filled with love. "I'm grateful too, my dear," she said. "We've been blessed with so much joy and beauty." As they sat there, they heard the sound of a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves. The wind carried the scent of fresh rice, and the old man's stomach growled softly. Hana laughed and got up to get some food. She brought out a basket filled with freshly cooked rice and some sweet pastries. Hanasaka Jiisan's eyes lit up, and he smiled, his face filled with delight. "Ah, my dear," he said, "you always know how to make me happy." Hana smiled, and handed him a bowl of steaming hot rice. They ate in silence, savoring the flavors and textures of the food. As they finished their meal, Emiko stirred, and woke up with a start. She looked around, confused, and then smiled, seeing her grandparents sitting there, smiling at her. "I'm sorry, Ojikin," she said, "I fell asleep." Hanasaka Jiisan and Hana laughed, and hugged her close. "It's okay, dear," the old man said. "We're happy to have you with us." Emiko smiled, and snuggled up close to her grandparents. They sat there, watching the stars, and feeling the peace and tranquility of the night. As the night wore on, the old man told more stories, his voice weaving a spell of wonder and magic. Emiko listened, entranced, her eyes wide with excitement. Hana sat quietly, listening to her husband's words, and feeling grateful for this life they'd built together. The world outside was quiet, and the only sound was the old man's voice, and the occasional hooting of an owl in the distance. As the night deepened, the stars shone brighter, and the moon cast a silver glow over the garden. It was a moment of perfect peace, a moment of tranquility and happiness. As the night wore on, Hanasaka Jiisan's stories became more gentle, and his voice grew softer. Emiko's eyes began to droop again, and she felt her grandparents' warmth around her. The old man's garden was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and the sound of crickets provided a soothing background melody. As they sat there, the world seemed to slow down, and the only thing that mattered was the love they shared. And as they sat there, they knew that tomorrow would bring its own joys and wonders, and that the old man's gift would bring beauty and magic to their lives. The night air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and the sound of crickets grew softer, like a gentle lullaby. Emiko's eyes drooped, and she felt her grandparents' warmth around her. Hanasaka Jiisan's voice grew softer, and his stories became more gentle, like a slow stream flowing through the garden. Hana smiled, and looked at her husband, her eyes filled with love. "It's time for bed, dear," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hanasaka Jiisan nodded, and gently stroked Emiko's hair. "Yes, it's time for sleep," he said. Emiko snuggled up close to her grandparents, feeling their warmth and love. The old man's garden was quiet, and the only sound was the distant hooting of an owl, like a soft whisper in the night. Hanasaka Jiisan and Hana slowly got up, and gently lifted Emiko into their arms. They carried her to her bed, and laid her down, covering her with a soft blanket. Emiko smiled, and looked up at her grandparents, her eyes shining with love. "I love you, Obeiken, Ojiken," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hanasaka Jiisan and Hana smiled, and kissed her forehead. "We love you too, dear," they said, their voices filled with warmth. They sat with Emiko for a moment, watching her drift off to sleep. The room was quiet, and the only sound was Emiko's gentle breathing. As they sat there, the world outside grew quieter, and the stars shone brighter in the sky. The moon cast a silver glow over the garden, and the flowers bloomed in the darkness, like tiny stars. Hanasaka Jiisan and Hana slowly got up, and walked back to their garden, hand in hand. They sat down on a bench, and looked up at the stars, feeling the peace and tranquility of the night. The world was quiet, and the only sound was the distant hooting of an owl, like a soft whisper in the night. The old man's garden was still, and the only movement was the gentle swaying of the flowers in the breeze. As they sat there, the night grew deeper, and the stars shone brighter. Hanasaka Jiisan and Hana felt their hearts filled with love and gratitude, and they knew that they were blessed to have this life together. They thought about Emiko, and the joy she brought to their lives. They thought about their garden, and the beauty it brought to their world. The old man's garden was a testament to the power of love and care, and it filled their hearts with peace and happiness. As they sat there, the world seemed to slow down, and the only thing that mattered was the love they shared. The night air grew cooler, and the stars shone brighter. Hanasaka, Jiisan and Hana sat in silence, watching the world around them. The flowers bloomed, and the trees stood tall, like sentinels in the night. The old man's garden was quiet, and the only sound was the distant hooting of an owl, like a soft whisper in the night. As they sat there, they felt their eyes growing heavy, and their bodies relaxing. They knew it was time for sleep, and they slowly got up and walked back to their house. They went to bed, feeling grateful for this life they'd built together, and for the love that filled their hearts. As they drifted off to sleep, they knew that tomorrow would bring its own joys and wonders, and that the old man's gift would bring beauty and magic to their lives. The world was quiet, and the only sound was the gentle breathing of Hanasaka, Jiisan and Hana, surrounded by the peace and tranquility of the night.